Since the start of summer 2019, Australia has seen one of the worst bushfire seasons in its history, with millions of hectares of land going up in fire and smoke. It is common for Australia to have large bushfires, but what sets this season apart is their number and the area they covered. The fires have destroyed thousands of homes, killed dozens, and devastated entire regions across the country. As is expected with disasters like this, the climate cult have not missed their opportunity to push their satanic religion. They have not wasted a second using every day to yell from the rooftops that it is all due to climate change, otherwise known as man-bear-pig. The mainstream fake news media has fallen over itself to blame these fires on their high demon, attacking anyone and everyone for daring to question the science. They claim they predicted it all, they claim they warned us, and that we should all now bow down to the science, lest the fires get worse in the future. Given most climate cultists are unemployed, living with their parents, or working in the public sector, they have spent much of the last month worshipping Gaia in public protests. Climate cult protests are now so disruptive that even the far-left climate cult-believing Dan Andrews government asked them to stop in order to allow police resources to assist in fire-affected regions. Cultists ignored Dick Ear's complaints and decided to protest anyway. Nothing will stop them in their pursuit of green utopia. Some media outlets even went so far as to compare the fires to the Holocaust in pursuit of their own political and religious agenda.
How dare you!
Naturally, given she is the current high priestess of the climate cult, the Toonsberger had her say, and of course, she blames Man-Bear-Pig. Even failed Prime Minister and likely psychopath Kevin Rudd attempted to use this tragedy to push his devotion to the climate cult, and himself, of course, his favourite thing in the world. But is it actually true? Are these particular devastating bushfires a result of man-made climate change, or is there something else at play? Every cultist in the world is desperate to blame Man-Bear-Pig, creating new propaganda terms like climate emergency and others. Never let a crisis go to waste, so to speak. The truth is, these fires are indeed a man-made disaster, just not in the way the climate cult will ever admit. Thank you so much for watching so far. I promise the content will resume in a moment. This work relies on the generosity of loyal fans to support it, and the best way you can do that, other than sharing the video, is by heading over to RRTV and making a pledge. Not only does this support my work, but it supports a number of independent creators. The added bonus being you get access to a small but growing pool of exclusive RRTV content with any pledge. Thank you so much for your support. Now, back to the important stuff. Arrgh. If we were to go through every single example of climate cultists using the Australian bushfires to push their religion, this video would go for hours. As such, it is best to just look at one or two of the worst offenders, because it is all essentially the same dishonest propaganda. Given they are one of the most devout climate cult propaganda outlets, The Guardian published column after column blaming the fires on Man-Bear-Pig. One example comes from Kitten Joshi, who wrote an article entitled "Something Else is Out of Control in Australia, Climate Disaster Denialism." He states, quote, "The impacts of the climate crisis are now clearly manifesting in ways beyond rising temperatures. In Australia, the conditions for severe bushfires are occurring far more regularly, and the country is now suffering its most intense bushfire season ever. The quantity of land burnt, the smoke pollution impacts, the temperatures and number of homes lost are all breaking historical records. At the same time, Australia is pioneering the denial of climate disaster. There is some interesting research around denialism. Researchers have essentially discovered a strong political divide when it comes to climate science. Progressives are much more likely to accept it as fact than conservatives. And presenting climate deniers with scientific information in the hope they'll change their minds actually reinforces their rejection because they are so taken aback by the information." End quote. The rest of Joshi's article rants about how it's all the media's fault and that so-called deniers in Parliament are preventing them from taking total tyrannical control. There is little more to it than that. If there is one trait that all warming cultists share, other than mass delusion, it is a complete lack of self-reflection. You see, in their mind, it is undeniable that CO2, aka plant food, is warming the planet. This is their religion, remember. As such, they cannot understand why anyone would disagree. Over several decades, this cult has labelled anyone who disagrees with them a denier, aka a heretic. They made this issue political on purpose. They spent decades lobbying government, especially local councils, to push their religion into law, yet now this cultist whines that the divide on this issue is political. It is typical projection from those on the political left. They will always accuse their opponents of crimes they themselves have committed. These people have a religious belief. There is no evidence to prove CO2 is hurting the planet, and nothing will ever change a devout warming cultist's faith. One of the most ridiculous pieces of climate cult propaganda came from the New York Slimes. They could not pass up an opportunity to attack one of their competitors while pushing their idiotic cult. It is more than 1,000 words of whining about Rupert Murdoch and the fact that he allows journalists, columnists, and others to question the climate cult. It is little more than a slander piece against one of their fellow mainstream media news outlets. The author makes slimy attack after slimy attack for accurately reporting and allowing people to question his religion. Nobody is to question the cult, apparently. If you dare question, then you are a denier and putting the planet at risk, or some cliche along those lines. The author even claims that green activists have not prevented adequate burn-offs. This is a flat-out lie. Ignoring for a second the fact that there are more green groups than just the political party called the Australian Greens, his justification is that the Green Party claim to support hazard reduction burn-offs on their policy page, but a closer look makes it obvious that this is not actually true. They claim they support land clearances, but only when guided by the best scientific, ecological and emergency services expertise. The same Greens think carbon dioxide, a gas required for life on Earth, is dangerous, and their justification is the experts and the science says so. This policy is likely just armour designed to give the Greens Party plausible deniability when the inevitable inferno results from a lack of land clearing and fuel reduction. Ask yourself, how many members of the Green Party have called for an increase in burn-offs since the fires started? How many have called to stop fining farmers for clearing their own land? The answer to that is none. Nada. Zero. Not a single senior member of the climate cult, and likely none of the foot soldiers either, has come out and called for more land clearing. Green zealots demand councils fine farmers for clearing their own land, they refuse to allow adequate fuel reduction burns, they blame man-bear pig when the country goes up in smoke, and then the Greens claim, "We support burn-offs, honest." For decades, green groups have called for governments to lock up national parks and prevent land clearing, and this is a commonly known fact. The Greens' public policy is a lie, and an obvious lie at that. It is designed to allow them plausible deniability, and a method to pivot back to blaming the climate change boogeyman. In fact, thanks to green regulations, one farmer received $100,000 in fines for clearing his own land. Then, as though God was showing us the stupidity of the climate cult, the fires missed his home while his neighbour's home burned down. The truth is, we have known for decades that an increase in fuel loads and a lack of fuel reduction burns makes fires a lot worse. Yet, climate cultists continue to drag their feet and insist on ignoring all relevant data. Most recently, the Royal Commission into the Black Saturday fires of 2009 that killed 173 people and destroyed thousands of homes found that fuel reduction burns could have prevented them. We have had repeated warnings that we need to reduce fuel loads in order to prevent fires. The Volunteer Firefighters Association stated the following in 2013, quote, "The VFFA is angered by comments from green lobby groups that tackling climate change was more important than prescribed burning of forest fuels to reduce bushfire risk. The real blame rests with the Greens and their ideology as they continue to oppose and undermine our efforts to conduct hazard reduction in the cooler months and to prevent private landowners from clearing their lands to reduce bushfire risk. Hazard reduction is the only proven management tool rural firefighters have to reduce the intensity and spread of bushfires, and this has been recognised in numerous bushfire inquiries since the Stretton inquiry into the 1939 Victorian bushfires." End quote. In December 2015, The Australian reported the following, quote, "One of Australia's leading fire experts has warned that the failure to conduct enough controlled burns is exposing people to another large-scale disaster, declaring the lack of intervention is creating Black Saturday-sized fuel loads." Former CSIRO bushfire scientist David Packham yesterday called for at least a doubling of controlled burns in states such as Victoria, where more than 180 people have died, 2,300 houses have been destroyed, and 75,000 head of livestock have been killed since 2002. Mr. Packham is at direct odds with Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews, but believes that after decades of studying fire, Australia needs to revert to a system where significantly more controlled burn-offs occur to slash fuel loads. Regular controlled burning would lead to cooler fires that are less destructive to the bush but create enough fire breaks to halt lightning strikes or deliberately lit blazes. Mr. Packham told The Australian that the Victorian government's decision to scrap a 5% target of controlled burns on public land that had been introduced after the 2009 Black Saturday bushfires was poor policy that amounted to pathological science, and in fact there needed to be much more burning. End quote. Despite the Royal Commission clearly recommending an increase in fuel reduction burning and land clearance, and despite experts calling the same, Traitor Premier Dick Ears Dan forced fuel loads even higher. No climate cultist has called out Dick Ears Dan for the damage he has done with this policy, because that would mean accepting responsibility. But it gets worse. As recently as February 2019, less than 12 months ago, experts warned that fuel loads were reaching dangerous levels. Their ABC reported former Fire Chief Officer who said, quote, "The forest fuel loads are very high. After the big fires, the scrub came back very heavy, and we have now got very high fuel loads throughout those burned areas." End quote. Despite repeated warnings and despite overwhelming evidence, the highest ranks of the public service are now proving themselves unfit for duty and potentially corrupt. The Victorian Fire Chief recently claimed calls for more burn-offs are emotional rubbish, completely disregarding the evidence that they work and are required. Then, New South Wales Rural Fire Chief Shane Fitzsimmons blamed climate change and an apparent shortening of colder months for being unable to complete required burn-offs. He said nothing of laws that prevent farmers clearing their own lands, instead chose to push parasite-class talking points. He must have missed news from barely a month earlier, at the start of summer, about the literal blizzard that blanketed ski resorts in snow. Obviously, this was a direct result of global warming, and soon snow will be a thing of the past or something like that. He must also have missed the report that the Bureau of Meteorology were recently caught fudging temperature data to make it appear as though we were getting record heat.
Hide the decline.
When you are in the warming cult, you do not need genuine data, because when the data does not suit, you simply change the data. According to the climate cult, it is too hot and dry to run adequate land clearing operations, but it is not so hot that ski season ends in summer, and we have no time to clear land, so we need to ban farmers from clearing it, apparently. According to the climate cult and to Shane Fitzsimmons, it is too dry to clear the land, yet in New South Wales it is no drier than usual. Current rainfall is well within what we would expect from natural variation, only now we are apparently unable to clear fuel loads because man-bear pig. According to the climate cult, despite repeated investigations and expert recommendations to burn off fuel loads and clear land, that is just emotional rubbish because reasons. You literally could not make this up. The world is just that crazy. These people are nutters and they infest every part of the parasitic state. They will never admit they were wrong because theirs is not a view based on empirical evidence or observation. It is purely that of a doomsday cult. But I digress. Since we know that these fires had nothing to do with climate change, despite parasite class bleating, we need to ask how exactly they started. The truth is, most fires did actually start as a direct result of human actions, just not in the way these climate cultists believe. It has nothing to do at all with CO2. From news.com, quote, "While the bushfire crisis gripping large parts of Australia continues, it's still too early to determine just how many blazes were deliberately lit by callous arsonists. But crime data from around the country covering the current devastating season in the worst affected states gives insight into the sinister origins of a proportion of infernos. Since November, authorities in New South Wales have charged or cautioned 183 people for some 200 bushfire-related offences, malicious or otherwise. Of those, 24 people have been charged with deliberately lighting bushfires. Another 53 were charged or cautioned for failing to comply with a total fire ban, or another 47 with discarding a lit cigarette." End quote. According to the Australian Institute of Criminology, 85% of fires are either arson, suspected arson, or accidental and a result of carelessness. So much for a climate emergency. Every time a climate cultist opens their mouth and lies about the cause of these fires, they are putting everyone at risk. Every time they lie and claim they support land clearing when it is undeniable that they do not, they prevent meaningful action to prevent bushfire disasters in the future. Instead of looking for practical solutions to the problem, they demand we all stop emitting CO2, the gas we literally exhale. They claim that human emissions of CO2, a fundamental requirement of all known life, are evil, while they refuse to cut their own emissions to zero. They are hypocrites and dangerous fools with far too much influence for anyone's good. They are responsible for these fires, not carbon dioxide. As an aside, the falsehood tests in proprietarian law make climate cult lies illegal and severely punishes them. But this is a discussion for another time. XYZ contributor Adam Piggott nails these thugs for what they are, refusing to hold back in his assessment, stating, quote, "Every time some green lunatic chains himself to a tree, what he's doing is providing more fuel for the fire. Save the trees translates into let's burn down everyone's houses. What we are seeing is the end point of this inaction. You can't blame this on climate change, not only because it's not a thing. If it were climate change that caused this, then why aren't there massive fires in Saudi Arabia? I mean, it gets really quite hot there, or so I'm told. Oh, that's right, there's no fuel load in that part of the world because the last known tree was eaten by a starving camel. The Australian fires have been directly caused by environmental terrorists, and the only way that we will be able to adequately protect our properties and even lives in the future will be by directly appropriating the blame where it belongs. Greenpeace, the Wilderness Society, and every other environmental organisation need to immediately be classified as terrorist groups and treated as such. They are a clear and present danger to the Australian people, and I'll be effed if they're going to scurry out of this one by bleating climate change as the culprit." End quote. Indeed. Man Bear Pig did not cause these fires. Green groups, local councils, state governments, climate cult media, and assorted acolytes did. They are responsible. They should pay us all compensation for the damage they have caused, and then we, the people, should run them out of the country permanently. How dare you! The climate changes. The climate has always changed. The climate will always change. And the climate cult are Satan-worshipping criminals, society's dregs, and parasitic losers. Their religion destroys lives, it has no place in any civilised society, and we should ban it and remove them before they burn down the entire country. I hope you enjoyed the video, share the truth around, and I'll see ya when I see ya.